What's up guys? Sorry for the lag. I know you all been waiting way too long for more of these tutorials. I've been hard at work trying to make these videos as entertaining and informative as possible. So I really hope you enjoy the upcoming videos. Without further ado, here I finally present to you episode 2. Okay, so for today's episode, we have these two beautiful FK8 Civic Type Rs and this awesome Toyota Supra built by Auto-Tuned. Before we go any further, let's get your equipment set up properly so you can capture some cinematic video. When it comes to still shots, I always recommend shooting in 60 frames per second. 24 frames per second works just fine, but just remember, you won't be able to slow down this footage smoothly. Slowing down anything 60 frames or greater gives you much more leeway in terms of having smoother, buttery footage. When I'm doing rollers or anytime the car is moving, I'll switch over to 24 frames. Make sure to follow the 180-degree shutter rule. This means doubling your shutter speed to whatever frame rate you've selected to use. Exact shutter speed values will vary depending on each camera, but it should be roughly double the value. For example, on my Canon 1DX, if I shoot in 24 frames per second, I set my shutter speed to 1/50th of a second. If I shoot in 60 frames per second, my shutter speed would be set at 1/125th a second. In theory, when this is practiced, you end up with natural, proper motion. Now in most cases, if you're shooting 24 frames per second and you apply this rule during the day, you'll notice that 1/50th of a second is usually way too bright during the day. Most people will bump up their shutter speed to compensate for excessive light. I've seen many people increasing their shutter speed to lower the exposure, but this is the incorrect way. You'll end up with really unnatural motion. Instead, use an ND filter. This allows you to reduce the amount of light coming into your sensor while keeping the shutter speed locked in. If in any case it is too dark now, you can always mess with the ISO to increase exposure. Doing things this way is good practice and you'll always have correct shutter speed value. Okay, now moving on, let's talk about lenses. To make it simple, there are two main things you need to know about lenses. First is the focal length. This is the main number you usually see. Focal length is the optical measurement and distance from the glass to your camera's sensor. To make it simple, something like a 14mm is considered an extreme wide, and a focal length from 85 to 300mm will be considered telephoto. How you use these will greatly affect your image. Pay attention to how the background compresses in each of these shots taken by different focal lengths. There are also variable zoom lenses, which are pretty popular. I use my 35mm for general purpose since it's not near the super wide end of lenses and it's not near the telephoto range either. I'll be using this lens to get pretty standard full or mid shots of the car. Anytime I need extra magnification, I'll use my 85mm. Good for close-up detail shots or if I just want the background to be compressed. For rollers, I almost always use my 16 to 35mm as the wide angle lets me capture the entire car and road. And if I need to zoom in a little, I can always do so in a pinch. Second number to pay attention to is the f-stop. This is the value of the aperture. Basically, the lower the f-stop, the more open the aperture will be, thus letting in more light. Now as I lower the f-stop, you can see more light coming in. F-stop also affects depth of field. The lower you go, the shallower it becomes. The opposite happens when you increase it. Instead, the depth of field becomes narrower. I always prefer to shoot wide open at the low end because I get a nice, shallow, blurry background which always looks more cinematic. During low light situations, extra light is always good too, so you won't have to bump up your ISO. High ISOs create noise and grain in your image. If you want shallow depth of field during the day, you gotta have an ND filter on deck. You'll indefinitely always be overexposing your image with a low f-stop during bright daylight. You can easily counter this by simply using an ND filter. Speaking of filters, you are definitely gonna need a circular polarizer when shooting cars. The vehicle's paint and glass has a lot of reflections, so using a circular polarizer is key to eliminate unwanted reflections and glare. If you're wondering, yes, I do stack a CPL on top of my ND filter if I need to use both during a shoot. In this case, I'm filming at night, so I won't be needing the ND filter. For those that are planning to stack filters, bring a thick rubber band with you at all times in case they get stuck together. Now that your camera's all set up, let's balance it onto our gimbal. Whatever gimbal you're using, you want to make sure you pre-balance every axis as best as you can. The better you balance your camera, the less your gimbal motors will have to work, and your gimbal battery will last much longer. Alright, so everything's all set up, so let's start shooting. The best way to start is with simple dolly in and outs, as well as left and rights.
So if you don't want to stick to dolly in, dolly out, dolly left, dolly right, you don't want to do basic stuff like that, you could do like a drive up, so it goes forward, but it starts low, and as I go forward, it goes up. So what that does is it reveals the subject, so it's a little more dynamic like that. Another one could be, instead of just going left to right, you can go down, start down, and as you go left to right, you go up, you raise up. And that also creates a more interesting shot. And then obviously we have parallax, which is just, if you see over here, I'm gonna set my focus point on the wheel, and then I'm gonna rotate, but I'm gonna keep the camera focused on the wheel the whole time, but I'm rotating the entire shot. A fake crane, where you start down here, and then as you go up, you rotate down. You're definitely gonna need like a grip like this and a monitor. Without that, you can't really see what you're shooting. So you always wanna use like a wall or like any type of object to be your foreground. Reveal the subject through the object.
Luckily, my 1DX has a great autofocus system, so I usually just set my focus point, then move across the area of the car that I want to capture. If you plan on doing manual focus, make sure to have a wireless follow focus and, if possible, a partner to help you pull focus. If you're shooting handheld, the technique is actually pretty similar. When I first started, I shot everything handheld. Wide squatting stance, locked elbows, camera close to your chest, hold your breath, rinse and repeat. Now, if you want to be energy and time efficient, plan your shots out to minimize the amount of times you need to change lenses. Whenever I film, I always start with my 35mm and get full body shots. This will include basic pans, dolly ins and outs, and so on. Then I'll move in a little closer with the same lens to get my mid shots. When I'm done circling around the car, I'll swap over to my 85mm and get detail shots as well as telephoto style shots. Finally, I'll swap over to the 16-35 and get those super wide angles. Usually by then, we'll be ready to do rollers and I'll already have the correct lens for rollers on, and that saves time. If you guys want to see the editing and color grading process of everything I just shot, stay tuned next week for episode 3. One more thing guys, if you want to rock some apparel, please check out my store. I got a bunch of new stickers as well as some new accessories. I'd greatly appreciate the support. It really gets this channel going and helps me make more videos like this. Alright, well, I hope you enjoyed this video and stay tuned for episode 3.